Beloved, one of the most transparent psalms, not that they all aren't transparent when it comes to David, but one of the psalms where David is ruthlessly honest is in Psalm 19, particularly when he gets to verse 12. And he's speaking of himself as the servant of the Lord in the verse prior, and he says, who can tell how often he offends? He's talking about himself. Who can tell, Lord, how often your servant offends? Because he's aware that he probably offends a lot of people. Not that you and I ever do that, but David is wrestling at that moment and wanting to see some deeper level of healing from his own fragmentation and a greater integration of all the parts of his inner life, even as we've talked about deep healing and transformation and moving, as we've been talking about, out of the cave into a place of joy and freedom. This moment of truth for David, who can tell how often he offends? Because he's not fully aware of the times when he's offending people. There are times I think we are aware, and there's probably times we're not aware, because everybody processes in their own way, and they don't always tell us what they're thinking. That's probably a good thing, right? But he goes on to say, cleanse me from my secret faults. This isn't any different than what he says in Psalm 139, search me and know my heart, see if there's any hurtful way in me. So he's saying the same thing, but from a different angle. Cleanse me from my secret faults. And I thought about that in light of the culture we're in. We are living in a day when everybody is finding fault with everybody else, and we're calling it a heightened sense of self-awareness, but I'm not sure it's a heightened sense of self-awareness. It's a heightened sense of, I'm aware of the faults you have, but I don't want to deal with the ones I have. And self-awareness and other awareness is tied to that body of discipline called emotional intelligence in the current culture. Now, that's not new. Augustine prays, Lord Jesus, let me know myself, let me know you. So self-awareness is part of the journey in the Spirit to well-being and wholeness. And yet here we are in a so-called age of heightened self-awareness where social scrutiny is through the roof. And with that, believe it or not, there's not integration in our culture, there's fragmentation in the culture. And so there's this ever-present tension between our desire to at least embody virtue as best we can, or let people at least consider that we're trying to be virtuous, and the hidden realities of all our lives where we know that we all carry secret faults. And so David is inviting us through his own transparency to a place of humility and self-examination in the presence of God. And he recognizes that beneath the surface of his actions, he's got motives that are deeper, and fears that are deeper than his motives, and brokenness that's below all that, that oftentimes is hidden, concealed. Some of it unconscious, even from David and from ourselves. If it's unconscious, we don't know it's there, right? And so in a world that's so focused on, in actual fact, external appearance and value judging, we want to be aware of what God is working out from the inside out in deep healing and transformation, so that we can experience genuine inner cleansing and the deep work of being freed from those shadowy places and coming into joy, amazingly liberated from the things that we're willing to admit about ourselves as we walk into the light, and make room for that genuine wholeness that Jesus intends for us to have, and the healing that is part of the journey into the fullness of his light. So I would argue that David, in his transparency, is inviting you and I to go beyond that mere surface correction of our behaviors. It's not behavior modification. And let's get past the virtue signaling that's so present in the current culture. And let's instead seek to come out of the cave, being transformed the closer we get to the light, to the very core of our being. And with David, let's cry for deliverance from our presumptuous sins, right? And recognize our tendency too often to act out of our own unexamined pride, our unexamined hubris, and be reminded again and again of the enduring need for grace, God's grace in our lives, and His ongoing work by the Spirit in those hidden, shadowy places that often get the best of us when we least expect it. And so I would argue that what David is saying speaks powerfully to where we are in the culture as we grapple with this word, authenticity. Everybody wants to be authentic. Well, let's have a conversation or two about what does it actually mean to be authentic? And then what does it mean to have to live in a culture of fragmentation where public opinion is always scrutinizing us? I would argue that there's a deep desire for genuine integrity and genuine authenticity in our personal lives, and I think we want to see it in the culture as well. But it's that old prayer of St. Francis, let there be peace on earth, let it begin with me, and that requires that you and I embrace the grace of the Spirit's inner work to cleanse us from those areas in our life that often get the best of us when we least expect it. Let's lean into this weekend with expectation and trust. God is doing something wonderful, and I'm just glad we're a part of it. I'm just glad we're included. Let's make this weekend intentionally a great weekend to celebrate Jesus. See you Sunday.